The end of the line. It always fascinated me. When I was a child, my parents bought me a tea towel with the London Underground map on it. And on it, I discovered the joys of Ongar. Ongar in those days was the end of the line. It was the furthest, most eastern station in the Underground, right at the end of the Central line. There was a little branch line that ran from Epping. It stopped at North Weald and Blake Hall before arriving at Ongar. Why was I intrigued by it? Well, my tea towel had, probably to attract the tourists, a picture of what looks now to be Queen Elizabeth Tower, what was at the time St. Stephen's Tower, and what most tourists thought was Big Ben. So I assumed that something dramatic happened at Ongar, which it didn't. Ongar is a fairly quiet suburb of Brentwood in Essex. Anyway, it ceased to be the end of the line in 1994 when they shut that little branch line. Now there's a little sort of model steam railway that covers some of the same distance. But on the line was Blake Hall. Blake Hall was apparently one of the least used underground stations in the system. And it closed in 1981. Why? Well, somebody put the station in the wrong place. It was about a mile and a half away from the actual Blake Hall, which was the home of a local landowner. And pretty much that was all there was to the area, except a few homes fairly close to the hall itself. So nowhere near the tube station. So it's hardly surprising they closed it down. The real reason why the extension line failed was because green belt regulation stopped a certain amount of building of homes in that part of the world. And because there were fewer homes, there were fewer customers for the railway line. And anyway, Ongar is close enough to Brentwood, and there's a straight line from Brentwood into Liverpool Street, and has been for many years. So there wasn't really a need for the extension of the line. The Central line actually is a really long line to travel. I've done it a few times. It seems like a lifetime when you get on the train once you go beyond Stratford. But let's look at other ends of lines. You know about Stanmore. It's the end of the Jubilee line. In my childhood, it was the end of the Bakerloo line, actually, which had two branches, one up to Stanmore and the other up to Watford Junction. That now ends at Harrow and Wealdstone and rejoins the Euston to Watford Junction line. At that point, you change trains and get on the line up to Watford Junk. Beyond that, my 1960s map, and the reason why I know it's from 1960, because it showed the Aylesbury as being the end of the Metropolitan line. Well, it was originally the end of the Metropolitan Railway, but that ceased in 1961. Now, of course, it's part of the Chiltern Railway, and it's the most beautiful line, well worth taking, from Marylebone. Aylesbury's fairly near to Oxford, actually, and it's always been a source of some curiosity as to why nobody's built a line from Aylesbury to Oxford. You can now go from Marylebone to Oxford, but it took an awfully long time to build the line. Aylesbury, well, it's fairly close to Stoke Mandeville. That was the next station further south, which is famous as being the birthplace of the Paralympics, created by the wonderfully named Dr. Gutmann. And I knew it because it was a place young kids went to go on matzah rambles during the Jewish festival of Passover. People took their picnics with their matzah and they walked the footpaths between Great Missenden and Wendover before taking the train back up to Moore Park and then joining the Metropolitan line. You know, I was in Chesham recently, and that is a desolate place, or at least the train station is very beautiful, but there's no one around because the train only goes every half an hour, and the local residents all know exactly when the train leaves, so they all turn up just for the last 5 minutes before the train arrives. So the Underground is a very different place at its extremities in that respect. In my childhood, the Piccadilly line extended only as far as Hounslow West. Afterwards, somebody built the extra line up to Heathrow. In those days, if you wanted to go to Heathrow, you had to basically either take a taxi or a minicab, or better, find someone else who was prepared to give you a lift. It was pretty hard to get to. At the time, we didn't realize it, but many immigrants from India and actually Asians from East Africa settled in the Hounslow area because it was relatively close to the airport. At the further extremities of the underground, you have Beckton, which I've sort of been to. Well, actually, I haven't been to the station. I crossed a roadway, I should say, a roadway bridge, and looked at Beckton and Beckton Alps in particular. The idea of the Alps being in southeast London does feel a little strange. Actually, it's a mound created by waste from the local gas station, and was, I think, at one stage a practice ski slope. Don't think that happens anymore, but I saw it on my way to Cyprus, a train station that commemorates a housing estate built in 1878, when the United Kingdom acquired at the Congress of Berlin the island of Cyprus, an awfully long way away from the actual Cyprus London Underground station. Beyond that, well, the outer reaches of the underground that I grew up on and that you all know, the Metropolitan line, takes you into Hertfordshire. The border is somewhere between Northwood and Moor Park stations. And the area around there benefited enormously from the development of the underground. I grew up in Pinner, which was a medieval village that was subsumed by Metroland, as it was called. When they built the Metropolitan Railway out into the suburbs, people started building houses in that area because they became very fashionable. It was very convenient to be able to get into London in 20 minutes to half an hour. And places a bit beyond there were actually quite ancient. Ruislip is in the Domesday Book. That means it was around in the late 11th century. So was Harrow, which appears in two tube stations in Harrow on the Hill and Harrow Wealdstone. Under the original Anglo-Saxon name, it appears in the Domesday Book, that is Herga. There used to be a folk club called the Herga Folk Club, which commemorated this. Otherwise, the edges of the underground are simply frontiers onto other railway systems. Wimbledon and Richmond, in my childhood, were the entry points into the southern region, as it was known. It's now the South Western Railway. I hope you've enjoyed this journey to the edges of the underground and that we'll get a chance at some point to go back to them.